So the first thing you want to keep in mind is directing the eye with leading lines. Usually, when you look at any visual, your eye falls first on a particular object. This object is usually the focal point of any design, whether it's a poster or some sort of visually formatted piece of paper or informational kind of thing. In this example that I'm sharing, your eyes are immediately attracted to a certain part of the visual. The question is, where do you look next? The simplest answer is basically where your eyes lead you. And typically, your eyes will lead you where the designer uses leading lines to direct you throughout a layout. The idea of leading lines also helps to nicely frame the text and lead your eyes back to focal points within specific areas. Often lines can be more obvious, using things like arrows or flowcharts. These are really useful methods for explaining information in sequences. The next thing you want to keep in mind is using hierarchy. Once you've created your focal point, you have to figure out what to do with the rest of the elements of your design composition. Of course, you have the rest of the elements to structure. You want to set a priority to them. Then we have to look at maybe a name of an event or what this whole visual is all about. Only after that we can keep looking for additional information like subheadings, dates, numbers, places to call, addresses. And all of this organization of information is done with the help of size, color, and weight, and this is known as hierarchy. Scaling text, bolding text, using italics, things like that, especially when it comes to typography. These are really important in terms of kind of highlighting the importance of information. The next tip we want to look at is using complementing elements. You want to always seek to create a unified look throughout your entire design. It's not a good idea to kind of like mix and match images and colors and themes from different sources with no similarities in style between them. This basically kind of tires the eyes of the viewer and can confuse them. The idea is to create cohesiveness. You can do this with colors, images, objects, and you just want to make sure that there's a nice connection between the different parts of your design. It's also important to repeat elements. Often your projects will consist of more than one page. If you repeat specific elements from one section of your design to another, this will help the viewer to orientate themselves easier across the design. Some of the repeating elements you could use are graphic motifs, certain kinds of types, specific layouts that are reused in different pages or parts of your project. The next tip I want to share is this idea of balancing your elements. So there are two types of balance in design composition: symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. The first uses similar elements, mirrored, things distributed equally on both sides of an axis. So this could be a visible or an invisible line. Symmetrical balance is very clean and elegant, but sometimes it can get a bit boring. So then designers can possibly prefer something like an asymmetrical balance in their layout design. In this scenario, you don't have equal sized elements. They're not always placed in a similar way. An asymmetrical balance occurs when you have different visual images on either side of a design, and yet the image still feels balanced. So to be considered asymmetrical, a design needs to have unequal visual weight on either side, but those unequal visuals need to still balance each other when you're looking at them. The next tip I want you to keep in mind is aligning your elements. Alignment is a very important tool to use in design composition, especially when it comes to organizing your elements. It often comes in handy when you have a lot of different types, colors, images, headings, and subheadings. There are many tools that you can use. Specifically, we're going to be using the Align tools in Affinity Publisher, and these can actually help you to snap and align elements together. And this helps to ensure that there's no floating pieces or messy design, or that your layout doesn't feel haphazard. And even the most asymmetric designs still have some sort of alignment and structuring of similar blocks of content within them. It's a general rule that when you have long blocks of text, the left alignment could help the eye to scan more easily. The next tip I want you to think about is using white space. White space really is an irreplaceable tool in bringing clarity into your design composition. White space is not necessarily empty space, but actually a really necessary element allowing your design to breathe. It also helps to emphasize the subject of interest. Apple does a really great job of utilizing white space in their design. It helps to focus the attention on specific elements of their advertisements. It's also really important to keep in mind scale in addition to the hierarchy that we were talking about before. As I mentioned before with regard to hierarchy, scale plays into the organization of elements. The size of elements can also be used in order to visually signal importance. So you might make something that's more important a bit bigger and bolder than, for example, something that is less important, which you could make smaller and fainter. Finally, the last tip I want to share with you is the idea of the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a really simple technique where designers divide their designs up into 3 rows and 3 columns. And at those points where the vertical and horizontal lines meet is where your focal point should be. Using the rule of thirds is a really great way to kick off your design's composition, as it gives you a really quick guide to positioning and framing your elements. So in this example, you might notice that the lines would intersect over the focal points of each image, the 2 hikers in the first image and then the largest bird in the second. The lines would also intersect at points around the text boxes, drawing the eyes to those specific points.